fundamentally believe this homelessness problem is inconsistent with our vision of a healthy evergreen state. And I think it's the right thing to do to submit this to the voters to allow them to join us in making this commitment.
Well, that's Governor Jay Inslee right there, making his case for a $4 billion proposal to add more housing and shelter to our state, a plan which would require an increase in the state's bonding capacity, which means a public vote. What is the appetite for that among lawmakers in Olympia? What other priorities are they considering? Plus, how is the city of Seattle dealing with the recurring reality of urban flooding in neighborhoods like South Park? And how has West Seattle been so lucky to have yet another problem with a major bridge? Believe it or not, it is happening. Well, we've got questions and we've got answers. That's the beauty of rhetorical questions, isn't it? I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. And joining me, he's back, baby, back from paternity leave, David Croman. David, great to have you back in the mix here. How is fatherhood treating you, my man?
Yeah, it's been great. Been really good. He's almost 3 months now, so we're settled into a nice routine and having a great time.
Awesome. And the sun's shining on his face. I love it.
Yeah.
David from the Seattle Times transportation reporter there. He's got a lot of information to break down with us over the next couple of minutes here. Thank you, David. As always, thank you to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of City Hall there. So, John, keep slinging that quality caffeine. We appreciate your support. And if you're listening, your New Year's resolution should be become a patron. We've been asking people to join at the $10 level and sending some quality mugs your way. That promotion is now complete. A big thanks to Meg for picking up that last mug. Send me a photo of that when you can, Meg. We'd really like to show that on the show. We're also welcoming in Christopher and Brian as patrons over the last couple of weeks here. Thank you very much. And New Year, new promotion, a full-color Seattle News Views and Brews sticker. You can put it on a mug, a folder, whatever you want to do. We're offering this at the $5 level. Hoping to get this out to all of our current patrons if I can, but please do join us. Support the show at the $5 level, just $5, and earn this sticker, this badge of honor. More news on this coming up soon. All right, we're going to get started here, right now. Well, David, first things first on this housing proposal, this $4 billion housing proposal that the governor's talked about. I've been talking with a few Seattle area state lawmakers here, Peterson, Wen in the Senate, Macri and Fitzgibbon in the House. Democrats are definitely not afraid to spend money here, but they're telling me this idea could be a really big lift. It is a budget writing year. We've got these nagging concerns about a mild recession possibly in 2023. And yes, we do have a housing crisis, but I'm trying to figure this out. Is it the right time to ask voters to spend $4 billion above our state's bonding capacity? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that will be a concern. And there's the politics of asking for that amount of money around, you know, who knows if we'll go into a recession or not. But there's certainly, I think, an uneasiness, regardless if that's where the economy ends up going. People are just sort of bracing themselves for the possibility. And even that kind of mental state, I think asking for more money at this time, I'm sure for a lot of people wouldn't sit very easily. You know, on the other hand, it's not an major election year for people in the legislature. You know, Democrats did really well in the last election. Republicans thought that they could possibly take one chamber of the legislature based on, you know, excessive spending and all that, but it just didn't happen. So, you know, I think I can understand that they have concerns. And also, I think Democrats do have some level of political cover if they decide to go this way, because they don't really have to face voters for a couple of years.
Right. They actually gained a seat in the House and gained a seat in the Senate, Democrats did in this past election. So interesting to see those majorities actually increase there. I guess I should also point out that there are a number of other priorities this session. We've got lawmakers wrestling with the Blake decision, where the state Supreme Court struck down Washington's drug possession felony law in 2021. A fix is due for that. A possible ban on assault weapons, codifying Roe versus Wade in our state constitution. But what else are you looking at, David? I know there's some transportation budget issues out there. What else do you have an eye on in Olympia this session?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the housing, there's obviously the question of the bond, but on the housing question, for me, the kind of most interesting thing to see is whether lawmakers will pass zoning changes.
Missing middle deal.
Yeah, it got pretty close last year, and then kind of died at the last second. You know, although the bill had been scaled down quite a bit. And so this would, you know, if you're talking about housing crisis and housing shortage, the goal behind this is to make it so, local cities and things like that have to allow more density, and they seem to orient it around transit corridors,
Right.
and so I think right now the bill is a half mile of transit, which would basically mean all of Seattle.
Yeah, right.
But in other places, so I think that would be a pretty major step, because
Yeah.
as we know, anyone who follows local politics at all knows that housing density and zoning can really bring out the worst in people sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And so to
It divides
have these
communities for
changes
sure.
come from the state level would kind of make a lot of these changes that have been up in the air at the local level happen in sort of one fell swoop.
Right.
So
Trying to kind
that
of
would be,
establish a floor, I guess, for these things. Yeah, keep going.
yeah, exactly. So that to me would be pretty major if that ends up making it through. And then, you mentioned transportation.
Mm-hmm.
I think last session was the big transportation session, because they passed the big $17 billion Move Ahead Washington funding package. Yep. This year, though, the pressure is really going to be about safety, because the deaths are still high across the country, and really, everywhere. In Washington State, we have a story today. It shows that it was up 20% in the first 9 months of last year. So lawmakers are going to be under a lot of pressure to make some kind of changes to decrease the number of people who are dying every day on the roads.
And make sure you watch this or check it out in the Seattle Times, folks. David had a very interesting story about what's happening with traffic deaths here in our state and what's going on around the country, too. But I wanted to move on to another issue that's on the Seattle City Council's Public Safety and Human Services Committee agenda this week: urban flooding in the South Park neighborhood. This happened, if you can't recall, back in late December here. Heavy rains, a king tide, 49 homes and businesses flooded in that area just outside of West Seattle there. Still some fallout from this. Seattle's Office of Emergency Management has actually been on scene, and they've stayed on scene. They don't normally do that, but they're out trying to help a lot of neighbors, including the Mara community, other communities of color. The big question now for me, David, we're expecting another king tide type of situation at the end of January, and the question is South Park ready for it? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I don't know. The last one certainly suggested no. I think the broader question here is these are not going to maybe be rare events anymore. Our rains are getting harder. I don't know how much the tides will always be this high every year, but I think we're getting more and more flooding events, and it seems like we get more of our rain all at once. So South Park just seems to never be able to catch a break. They seem to always kind of be the community that bears the brunt of anything, really: pollution, natural disaster, traffic, transit, lack of transit. Mm-hmm. So I don't know enough about sort of infrastructure to know what the city can have done in the last couple of weeks to prepare them again. But I do think it's going to be a long-term conversation about resilience down there.
Absolutely. And you bring up a really good point about this neighborhood, because there was this study, I think we both talked about this a few months ago, but the EPA figured out that in 2013 in this report that residents of the Duwamish Valley and also going into Rainier and some other areas there in South Seattle, they have a lower lifespan than anybody else in the city. They get sicker more often than anybody else in the city. And it's something that I think the city's looking at. But I guess in terms of looking at this long term, because we do have ocean levels rising, we do have climate change to be concerned about. When you look at this, even if the city is going to do some temporary stuff, and it sounds like they will be building up some berms and things like that to try to help things temporarily, it sounds like a much larger long-term, maybe federal investment is needed there. I don't know if this is like FEMA level just yet, but who knows? With these water levels rising, et cetera, I think this is going to be something that's going to require a pretty big investment potentially at the federal level.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for the city and Seattle Public Utilities and some of the utility parts of the city, a lot of this to me is a bigger story. South Park is kind of the canary in the coal mine in some ways, which is a lot of our infrastructure, I think, was built with certain assumptions about how much rainfall we'd get, how much flooding we'd get, in the case of South Park tides. And I think a lot of those assumptions probably need to be revisited, just because, 100-year floods are no longer going to be 100-year floods anymore. They might be 25-year floods. On the flip side, there's the same issue with heat. You talk about concrete and tree canopy and which neighborhoods have protection from heat. And so I do think that it's probably soon time for the city to have kind of a comprehensive conversation about resiliency in the city and in how well it's prepared to handle a climate that didn't exist when a lot of parts of the city were built.
Yeah, very good point. And this is something that the city council is going to be dealing with, folks, over the next couple of weeks here. They're starting with the committee level here, but this is clearly one of those discussions that needs to continue. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on there, but we need to talk about something up next here. Seattle's waterfront renovation nearing a glorious finish. Now, how do you manage it to make sure it's welcoming for everybody, and where does that intersect with our homelessness crisis and public safety? We're going to talk about it on Now Hear This. Okay, so if you haven't been to the Seattle waterfront recently, I forgive you. Pretty soggy out there. A lot of construction still underway. But if you have, you've seen there's some progress being made towards making this long-awaited connection between Pike Place and the waterfront right by the Seattle Aquarium. It's set to fully open later on this year. The Seattle City Council discussed this last week in a meeting you might have missed. I want you to hear from Robert Nellums, the soon-to-be retiring director of the Seattle Center, explaining how the Seattle Center will be taking over operations and management of the waterfront.
We are grateful the park will evolve over time, allowing us an opportunity to grow into this public space. And we look forward to helping friends create a wonderful new space for our citizens to engage in.
I should point out that Marshall Foster, the current director of the waterfront, will be transitioning into Robert Nellums' job next month as Nellums retires after 40 years of city service. Way to go, Robert. That's a long time to be with the city. But David, I wanted to discuss this because this public safety debate was front and center on the waterfront for the council. So the Seattle Center is a little bit of a different agency. It has a policy that says we can exclude people from the center. So tell people they can't be in the center, can't be on that property anymore. They can exclude people from the center and now the waterfront for up to 365 days if there's a public safety problem. Bear with me here. The Seattle Parks Department does this a little bit differently. Councilmember Herbold pointed this out in the meeting. It also has this policy about exclusion, but has voluntarily said we're only going to do one-day exclusions. They talked to a number of homeless advocacy groups and came up with that voluntary idea. So then you got Director Nellums coming back and saying our exclusions average about 1 to 7 days, but we've been doing this for 20 years without a lot of complaints. But it does look like the council is going to follow up on this policy from Seattle Center, trying to get some more data and looking at that. And David, I just wanted to ask about this because this is a major, major project for the city. How do you see this public safety effort rolling out? There's a ton of public investment in the waterfront right now.
Yeah, I think it's we see this question and conversation come up around a lot of public parks, probably most notably was a City Hall Park downtown. And, you know, I guess there are examples of the public safety kind of question working well in the city and then maybe not so well. I think City Hall Park so far has been an example of it not working that well. It's just the whole park is still fenced off because they kind of gave up, it seems. But then there are examples like, you know, Occidental Park, I would say, and Westlake Park, where they took this approach of, you know, quote, activating it. And so you make it, you know, the idea being you foster enough kind of positive, productive activity that, you know, the public safety issues kind of blend into the background and people can kind of coexist. And, you know, I think if the waterfront is going to work from a public safety perspective, it's going to take striking that balance well, which is, you know, you can't bar people from public spaces purely because they're homeless.
Right.
And so, you know, I think the kind of best approach, rather than just having like a bunch of police or whatever down there all the time, is to make it a place where all kinds of people feel comfortable sitting and coexisting. And, you know, that's the nature of a true public space is people from all different backgrounds and coming, you know, rich and poor. And in this case, homeless or not, can all kind of coexist and enjoy it together. And that takes giving people a sense of purpose down there and a reason to be there and a reason to want to go down there and enjoy that. I think that'll be easier with the waterfront because it's such a tourist destination. Pike Place is busy. You know, there's people down there. You know, I think a lot of that stuff, obviously there's going to be some safety concerns and you can kind of deal with those. It just seems like the more people, the better.
Yeah, right. In terms of crowds of people around. And And it's interesting. I think, again, just because this is such a massive investment that's been going on for decades for the city here, you remember the big discussions we had in the city over the elevated structure of the viaduct and putting that underground and all the hue and cry over that. I mean, this is kind of the culmination of all this process after so many years. And what I was seeing, David, from the city was this idea of a tiered response. And we've seen this in other places too. Start off in terms of people who might be homeless or causing an issue. You have someone from REACH, that local outreach group there. They would go first and say, hey, what's going on here? Can we help you figure out something? You need shelter or whatever else. So that's the first step. Then you've got the tier 2 folks. You've got the park ambassadors. We've seen these folks with the yellow jackets going around Occidental Park, Westlake Park for that matter, trying to guide people and not really having any enforcement capabilities, but make sure they're issuing warnings. And then Seattle Center, at least for its part, has its own public safety officer. So they kind of have this whole tiered response here. And I really do think it's going to be something along the lines of a public-private partnership, too, that is involved with this, because those businesses on the waterfront want to make this work, and they're going to invest in these different public safety solutions to try to make sure that this works out in a way that works out for their businesses and works out for the city, too.
Yeah, and I think all of that makes sense. But then I will also kind of fall back to I don't think you can achieve what you want purely by the presence of, even if they're outreach workers or park ambassadors. It seems like it's hard to fully kind of craft the environment you want through monitoring and enforcement, even if it's a light enforcement. And I think the pandemic kind of showed that when people disappear from a space, that's kind of when the most problems show up. But when you can flood a space with activity and a lot of that stuff goes away. There's an academic term for it. I've been trying to remember it, but I can't. Which is basically when you have enough people and enough positive activity, the ability to kind of do something against the law or to hurt somebody just becomes a lot more difficult. And so at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be about fostering a positive space down there, make it a place that people want to go out of their way to go to. Keep it busy and humming and active. And, I think that is how you get to a healthy functioning space where people can coexist together. Yeah. Activating that space is a huge part of what's going to be going on there. And I appreciate that discussion. And there will be some legislation memorializing this arrangement with Seattle Center coming later this month and into March. So we'll keep you posted on what the Seattle City Council is talking about there, and Seattle Center too. But I wanted to talk about another topic as we trump through the weeds of city government here, how the city preserves its landmarks. Very interesting. A vote on an amendment this week from Councilmember Morales for the Seattle City Council about a building in South Lake Union. It's now a drive-through Walgreens. She really wants to see it used for another purpose here, but this is a landmark, harkens back to the 1950s car culture, and I read about this in Public Cola, and I just thought this was really interesting, David, because the city council used to landmark businesses pretty frequently, but now with the housing crisis we have, maybe not so much. How do you see this tension building as we move into the future, as our housing crisis clearly continues to grow? Yeah, I do think in some sectors of the city's politics, the appetite for landmarking has decreased. The biggest one being Wallingford recently, which has kind of declared itself a historic district. There was a lot of pushback to that because it would seem to kind of pave the way to exempt the neighborhood from adding more density and more housing and building up at a time when that is necessary. And so, I think it would be a misnomer to say that sort of housing density advocates don't favor any form of historic preservation or, landmarking in some cases. But there is also a sense that sometimes landmarking can kind of be a means to an end to a different, which is basically to prevent housing in places that people don't want it. And so balancing those two, I think that's a balance that I think, at least in some parts of the city, politics of the city, that the appetite for that has decreased. Yeah, and this makes me think of a discussion we had a couple months ago, David, about protecting trees in the city of Seattle, too. For whatever reason, these different camps of people politically, people who want to preserve trees, people who want to end up preserving historic landmarks, etc., end up being on the same page with some of the more NIMBY-ish people out there that want to keep things out of their backyard. And so
I just see this conversation really continuing into the future as we look at the comprehensive plan and how that's going to get updated this year and next. Do you see this discussion coming up again about landmarks, especially in relation to that comprehensive plan?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably secondary to some of the bigger conversations
Sure.
around zoning changes that will certainly come up as part of that plan. But, again, when an entire neighborhood, and I don't know totally the ins and outs of the landmarking process, but when an entire neighborhood can sort of become a historic district at a time when there's growing recognition that all neighborhoods need to add more housing, then yes, I think the process, the preservation process in the city will certainly get a second look. I'd say the time, I'm trying to think, the last time this was really in the news, I would say it was probably around the Showbox when that was
right. Yep.
When that was going to maybe be torn down. My sense is COVID kind of derailed that whole thing, but there was a lot of back and forth around. There was a lot of back and forth there around whether that really qualified. It's great for a lot of people, and people like to go to the Showbox, and no knock on the Showbox itself, but is it truly a historic building that needs landmarking? I don't know, or is it just people sort of using the landmarking process to prevent something that they didn't want in the first place? And I think that we've seen that applied in a few different places, and certainly I think going forward, the definition of landmark might need a little refining.
Some tweaking. Yeah, I remember that with that Showbox debate because, yes, well known as a venue in the 90s when grunge was really hitting the scene in Seattle. But before that, it was a market. I mean, it had a lot of different changed uses over the years, which always raises these questions about landmarks and what should this be landmarked as if we're going to get real about it. So, thank you for that discussion, David. Very, very interesting to see what happens next with that landmarking process, and we'll keep an eye on it here. All right, well, coming up, West Seattle dealing with another major bridge problem, sad but true. David's got the breakdown on Transportation Talk. All right, so David, what evil deeds have the people of West Seattle done to deserve yet another major bridge closure? I swear it's not my fault, but we're talking about the swing bridge, that low bridge that goes across the Duwamish River underneath the high bridge, the West Seattle Bridge there. A lot of freight uses that low bridge. It's set up for bicycles too, and sometimes it does get stuck in the open position to let boats through. But this time it looks like it's going to be stuck for a while. David, what happened with this?
Try and do this without getting too far in the weeds, but it's a pretty interesting bridge. It's my sense is it's actually kind of one of a kind, this swing bridge that kind of rotates on an axis.
It does that little twisty turning in the middle, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon, but the fact it only turns 45 degrees, which makes it unique. But to do all this stuff, it sits on these hydraulic cylinders, and there are four of them, and one of them broke, basically. And this is a 15,000-pound part. You can't really go in there and just fix it, so you actually have to remove the thing, which they were doing over the last couple of days. So it's a big project. Fortunately for the people of West Seattle, it's not quite as crucial as the high bridge, the West Seattle Bridge. That said, it is, if you're a biker and you're coming and going from West Seattle, it's really hard to get off that peninsula. You have to go super far south to get around that. So if you're a biker, that's
I've done it. First Seattle, the First Avenue Bridge South on a bike. That you really got to want it. That's a very potentially really dangerous spot too for bikes. Keep going, please.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's kind of most disruptive to people who like to ride their bikes. The question now that maybe we'll find out today is whether or not they can kind of jury rig it to run on 3 of these hydraulic cylinders, so that they can get it into the closed position and have it using again while they fix the 4th hydraulic cylinder.
I see.
When they first announced the closure of this bridge, they were pretty confident they could do that, but just in the last day or so, it seems like it's a little bit more of a question mark of whether or not that's actually going to work. So if that does work, then it actually should probably be open again to traffic, I would say, in the next week or so. If it doesn't work, then we're looking at months because then they have to fix
because it's not like a this isn't a part that you get at Home Depot or something like this.
No.
This is something pretty major. Let me know about that. Why could it take that long?
First, I mean, they had to build a custom crane to get it out.
That's right. Right.
It's really awkward, it's, and then, it's not, like you said, it's not like a 15,000 pound hydraulic cylinder is, I mean, these are custom made parts. This is,
you can't find
as I mentioned, this is kind of a cool bridge in some ways from an engineering perspective. It was even featured on a Discovery Channel program in 2007 talking about it. But the problem with having a unique and interesting bridge is you have unique parts, and then those unique parts, when they break, you got to go out and hire the right people to actually fix them. And it's not like they can just come and do it on site. They got to truck this thing off somewhere else and have it fixed before they go through the process of reinstalling it and testing it. So this isn't like a couple of ball bearings that need replacing. This is a fairly major part. And so, for the bikers of West Seattle, I hope that they can figure out a way to get it operational on 3, because otherwise it's going to be a while of taking that First Avenue South detour.
Oh yeah.
The good news on the detour is they installed a temporary bike lane for people. That's going to stay there until they get this bridge reopened. But that doesn't mean it's a pleasant ride, and it's definitely a longer one.
It's a tough run. I know that coming from my end of things. And I guess on the plus side too, water taxi service has been made free here going across Elliott Bay. That was another piece to this too.
Right. Yes. There's the water taxi, which is pretty close by. So that's probably the option that more people would take rather than take that southern detour. And then, of course, you can take a bus across the upper West Seattle Bridge.
Right.
But, none of it's ideal. And just the timing of it all, that it happened so close after the High Bridge being closed for 2.5 years.
No, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, those are the two, and I don't want to jinx anything about what's going to happen with the First Avenue South Bridge, but these things always come in threes, man. So this is the stuff that I get worried about.
Right.
So.
I mean, that bridge breaks down all the time.
That's true.
Issues with that one too. So it's you want redundancy in your systems, and that's starting to quickly disappear. Yeah,
for sure. All right, well, thank you for all that, David. I got one final question for you here. I don't think anyone expected the Seahawks to do all that much this year, at the beginning of the year at least. And yes, they had to limp into the playoffs here, but they are in. I just need to ask, do you think they have a shot to advance in the postseason? San Francisco's pretty hot.
Yeah, I mean, betting odds say no. You got to, if you were a smart person, you'd bet on the 49ers because they're just a better team. That said, I remember watching a 7-9 Seahawks team beat the New Orleans Saints in the first round with the Marshawn Lynch run. So we've seen crazier things.
The beast mode, baby.
Yeah,
I know. Here's hoping. It's been fun to watch that team this year. They've got that scrappy feel that I felt out of the Mariners too. So here's the Seattle scrappiness. More of that, and we'll see what happens there. Good luck to the Hawks.
The first time in Seattle history that both the Mariners and the Seahawks made the playoffs in the same year.
That's a big deal, man. I mean, this is what I'm saying. The Huskies made a bowl. I mean, this is good stuff. This is trending in the right direction.
Playoffs.
Right. No, they're looking good too. Everything's coming up Seattle, baby. We'll see how this pans out. David, thank you so much for joining me as always here. Thanks to everybody who's listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you might like to listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.